a boy and a girl twins. They were born to my husband and my absolute best friend. I signed the divorce papers in absolute silence. When he took her home to his family's historic estate to break the news to his mother, she reportedly froze the moment she laid eyes on the two infants. She never told you, did she? Just as I capped my pen after signing the final page of the divorce settlement, my iPhone lit up. It was a text message from Julian, a single photo. In it, he and Chloe were leaning against each other, beaming with joy as they swaddled two newborns, one in baby blue, the other in blush pink. The background was the expansive sun-drenched window of a VIP maternity suite at Mount Sinai Hospital. Beneath the photo was a short caption, "Healthy boy and girl twins. Chloe and I have started our new chapter together. I hope you can move on with your life too." I placed the phone face down on my desk. Spread out before me was a complete liquidation inventory of every asset registered in my name. Stocks, mutual funds, real estate holdings, private equity stakes. Every single item was meticulously catalogued. I had pulled all-nighters for a week straight to organize it. This wasn't for property division. This was to permanently and completely sever all financial ties with Julian Montgomery. He probably assumed that once I signed the agreement his attorney drafted, I would simply fade away. A pathetic woman quietly discarded for his true love, Chloe. He genuinely believed this was his orchestrated victory, the fitting end for a cold, work-obsessed career woman who didn't understand emotional intimacy and couldn't even give him a child. He was dead wrong. I picked up the spreadsheet and walked over to the massive glass whiteboard dominating my home office wall. This glass wall once held the product development pipelines and series, funding roadmaps I had drawn up to save his failing startup years ago. Today, it was densely covered in neon yellow and pink sticky notes. Intersecting arrows and alphanumeric codes spread across the glass like a complex financial mosaic, mapping out the multi-million-dollar fund flows of dozens of offshore shell companies and holding groups. This was my new battlefield, the ultimate liquidation tool I had prepared just for myself. My phone buzzed again, an incoming call. The names Julian Times flashed on the screen. I stared at the screen for 3 seconds before sliding my ink-stained finger across the glass just before it went to voicemail. I didn't say a word. From the other end of the line came Julian's deliberately subdued, yet unmistakably smug voice bubbling up like the fizz of a freshly popped bottle of champagne. "Did you see the picture?" He paused, clearly waiting for me to break down or react. When I maintained my silence, he continued in a boastful tone that felt like it was trying to punch straight through the cellular towers and slap me across the face. "Chloe and I had twins, a boy and a girl. The little guy is 6 pound 3 oz and his sister is pound 12 oz. Super healthy. It was a rough delivery for Chloe, but it was all worth it. You really should be happy for us." Holding a bright red dry erase marker in my left hand, I traced the end of a dotted line representing a fund transfer to a Delaware LLC on the bottom right corner of the whiteboard and drew a massive forceful question mark. The tip of the marker squeaked sharply against the glass. "Oh," I replied to the empty room in a completely flat voice. Then I asked, "Should I send a gift? By your family's Southern hospitality standards. I suppose I owe 2 gifts now." The other end of the line went dead silent for a moment. I could vividly picture Julian's expression right then. His triumphant smirk froze stiff on his face. He had placed this call specifically to hear me devastated, to hear me scream, cry, and hysterically interrogate him. My suffering was the necessary spice he needed to justify his betrayal and infidelity, elevating his and Chloe's illicit affair into a grand, tragic, and victorious romance. Instead, he got nothing but my tasteless acknowledgement and a mundane question about baby registry etiquette. After roughly 30 seconds, he finally spoke again. The artificial tenderness had vanished from his voice, replaced by the hypocritical, patronizing pity I had grown all too familiar with over 5 years of marriage. "Alina, please don't be like this," he sighed, sounding as if he genuinely cared about my emotional well-being. "I know it hurts. There's no point in acting tough. We were married for 5 years. What happened between us isn't entirely my fault. You were just too strong. You tried to execute everything like a corporate project, trying to control every variable. Our apartment felt like an icebox. In 5 years, I never felt a shred of warmth, but Chloe is different. She gives me a real home, a truly warm, loving home. A home. I repeated the words silently in my head. I shifted my gaze from the cold numbers and arrows on the glass wall and looked out the window. Outside, the gray skyline of downtown Chicago stretched out to the horizon, the glass facades of the surrounding skyscrapers, reflecting a dull, leaden light. We had lived in this ultra-luxury high-rise for 5 years of our marriage. Yet, I had rarely ever taken the time to simply stand here and appreciate the view. I had poured the best 5 years of my life into Julian and his bankrupt tech startup, Next Gen Solutions. I held a master's degree in financial risk management and went straight into a Big Four accounting firm, right out of grad school, working myself to the bone to become a senior manager. I met Julian when he was drowning in debt with his new venture. I used my specialized background to completely rebuild his financial models, untangle his chaotic accounting ledgers, and pull all-nighters writing his business plans. I sat by his side through endless venture capital pitch meetings, drinking myself sick with potential corporate partners, just to secure his first decent round of angel investment. Later, when the company teetered on the brink of insolvency multiple times, I leveraged my professional network and my personal savings, even going so far as to quietly take out a home equity line of credit on the small suburban house my late parents left me to plug his fatal cash flow deficits. I thought we were comrades in arms, equal partners who guarded each other's backs in the corporate trenches. I never imagined that in his eyes I was merely an icebox that refused to warm up. Julian's voice dragged me back to reality, a home with children laughing, warm home-cooked meals waiting on the table, and a light left on for me when I get back. Not a house where I come home at midnight only to watch you stare at risk spreadsheets and audit data. Elena, I had my lawyer draft the property settlement agreement. I'll have it couriered to your office tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm not ungrateful. You stood by me through the lean years and suffered a lot. I'll make sure you get what you're owed. That won't be necessary, I interrupted him, my voice entirely devoid of inflection. The settlement papers are already prepared. They're inside the antique steel safe in your home office. The combination is your birthday. I've already signed every page. Julian fell silent again. The silence lasted much longer. I could even hear his ragged, slightly accelerated breathing over the receiver. He was frantically trying to process this information, his brain working overtime to figure out when I had prepared the documents and how I had discovered the combination to his private safe. By now, his face was surely a mix of shock, humiliation, and the sudden infuriating realization that his prey had willingly slipped the snare. "Since when have you been planning this?" he finally demanded, his voice suddenly dry and growly. "Since the first time you claimed you were pulling an all-nighter with the engineering team for a product launch, and Chloe posted a picture of the city skyline from a suite at the Ritz-Carlton on her Instagram," I answered cleanly and without hesitation. "Don't forget what I do for a living, Jules. I eat, sleep, and breathe risk assessment. My job is to analyze minute, anomalous data points to predict and mitigate catastrophic financial defaults. Marriage in a corporate sense is simply a cooperative partnership requiring active risk management. When the risk index exceeds my maximum allowable tolerance, executing an immediate stop-loss is the only logical move." With that, I didn't wait for his rebuttal. I ended the call, switched my phone to silent, and tossed it face down onto the leather sofa. The intricate web of financial transfers on my whiteboard seemed to shimmer before my eyes, overlapping bizarrely with the last 5 years of my domestic life. That marketing expansion budget he clumsily misappropriated corresponded precisely to the first Hermes Birkin bag he gifted Chloe. The repeatedly inflated R&D payroll expenses covered the flights and overwater bungalow bills for their secret getaway to Maui. And those recurring consulting fees wired monthly from several anonymous shell companies were undoubtedly paying the mortgage on the luxury midtown condo registered under Chloe's name. Chloe, my former college roommate, my supposed best friend who shared a cramped dorm room with me for 4 years like a sister. We rode the crowded subways together, shared a dingy, roach-infested apartment in Queens after graduation, and spent countless late nights drinking cheap wine on the Fireshire escape, complaining about unreasonable bosses and toxic ex-boyfriends. Even after I landed a high-paying corporate job, I never forgot her. I leveraged my internal contacts to get her a respectable administrative position at a decent firm. She and Julian met at a weekend dinner party I hosted to celebrate a promotion. I remember laughing that night, slapping Julian lightly on the shoulder and saying, "Chloe is my absolute best friend in the world, so you'd better treat her like royalty." What a sickening irony. I used to think that when the scalpel of truth finally sliced through the glamorous veneer of my life to reveal the rotting, infected reality beneath, I would be paralyzed by agonizing pain, feeling my entire universe collapse around me, but it didn't happen that way. As the pieces of evidence lined up before me one after another, the very first emotion that surfaced was a cold, almost surgical professional composure. My brain kicked into gear like a high-speed quantitative algorithm, automatically calculating total losses, assessing current liabilities, and drafting optimal mitigation strategies. The grief and rage were compressed into a tiny sealed compartment at the very bottom of my rational mind. Divorce was a swift stop-loss. Liquidating my assets was simply reclaiming my initial capital contribution. As for Julian and Chloe, I stared at the bold red question mark on my whiteboard and allowed a cold, ironic smirk to touch the corners of my mouth. Sometimes retribution doesn't require getting your own hands dirty. Because exactly 1 week ago, my nominal mother-in-law, Beatrice Montgomery, had placed a highly unusual rambling telephone call to me that lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Throughout that exhausting call, the aristocratic Southern matriarch sighed repeatedly, using the roundabout passive-aggressive phrasing typical of old-money socialites to hint at a deep, suffocating anxiety keeping her awake at night. She wasn't worried about her successful CEO son, nor was she lamenting the loss of her useless daughter-in-law. Her anxiety revolved entirely around Chloe, the sweet, traditional, domestically inclined woman Julian constantly bragged about, who was supposedly carrying the next generation of Montgomery heirs. The next afternoon, right on schedule, Julian arrived at my penthouse, accompanied by his corporate counsel, Brad Harrison. Julian was wearing a brand new tailored Armani suit, every hair gelled perfectly into place, his face exuding confidence mixed with a trace of underlying defensive caution. Chloe wasn't with him. It made sense. Having just given birth, she was likely lounging in a high-end postpartum recovery retreat, eagerly savoring the fruits of her victory. Inside my penthouse, every single item belonging to Julian, from his custom golf clubs and high-fidelity audio system to his extensive collection of imported anime figurines and discarded silk pajamas, had been categorized, securely packed, and neatly stacked by the front entrance. The towering stack of heavy cardboard boxes looked like a miniature graveyard of our marriage. When Julian pushed the door open and took in the scene, his brow furrowed deeply. The calm, superior demeanor he was trying so hard to project cracked instantly. "Elena, what is the meaning of this?" His tone was sharp, his eyes bypassing the boxes to glare at me with suspicious scrutiny. "There's no need to kick me out like a stray dog. Why make this so ugly and dramatic?" I sat calmly on the living room sofa, a thin stack of legal documents spread across the coffee table in front of me. I ignored his complaint entirely and simply raised my chin toward the empty armchairs opposite me. Julian and Attorney Harrison exchanged a brief look. Harrison pushed his gold-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose and sat down first, adopting a strictly professional, detached posture. I slid the top document across the glass table toward Julian. "This is the property division agreement. All premarital assets remain the sole property of their respective owners. I assume there are no objections to that clause." Our marital assets consist primarily of your 35% equity stake in Next Gen Solutions, 3 jointly owned real estate properties, 2 vehicles, and several diversified investment portfolios. My proposed allocation is laid out clearly on page 2. Take a look. Julian didn't reach for it. Attorney Harrison picked up the packet and began scanning the pages with rapid precision. After reading just 3 pages, the lawyer's expression shifted dramatically. He adjusted his glasses twice in quick succession, looking up at me with a gaze filled with a mixture of professional shock and sharp reassessment. "Mrs. Montgomery," Harrison began, his voice intentionally level, though he couldn't completely mask his incredulity. "It appears there are several critical discrepancies in this proposal. Mr. Montgomery's equity and Next Gen Solutions is an operational business asset under state statutory guidelines regarding marital asset appreciation, as well as the explicit terms outlined in your prenuptial agreement's addendum." Counselor Harrison, I cut him off smoothly, pulling a much thicker, professionally bound legal binder from beside my laptop and placing it directly in front of him. "This contains certified copies of all core financial ledgers for Next Gen Solutions from its incorporation to the present fiscal quarter, complete bank wire transaction histories, and the formal investment subscription agreements for all 5 major funding rounds. Specifically, rounds 2 and 3 occurred when the firm's operational cash flow was completely exhausted and bankruptcy was imminent. The capital injected during those crises came entirely from my personal funds, channeled through my late mother's family trust." I paused for a breath, watching Attorney Harrison's eyes widen in genuine shock as Julian's face darkened with sudden apprehension. I continued in a calm, measured tone. "According to Section 4, Paragraph B of our prenuptial addendum, all equity acquired via independent personal capital injection during marriage, along with 100% of its subsequent market appreciation, remains my exclusive, non-divisible personal property. Furthermore, regarding the 15% equity stake in NextGen purchased using our joint marital funds, I am willing to assign my half to Julian at a 50% valuation discount based on current market metrics. After all, with 2 new infants in the picture, his household expenditures are about to increase exponentially." Attorney Harrison's hands were trembling slightly now. He flipped through the thick binder with desperate speed, his face growing paler with every page he turned. He likely never imagined in his wildest dreams that this quiet ex-wife, who had spent the last 5 years staying out of the corporate spotlight and playing the supportive partner, was sitting on such a comprehensive, lethal cache of evidentiary documentation. These documents didn't just clarify equity ownership, they acted as a legal scalpel, peeling back the layers to expose his client's continuous, highly questionable financial manipulations. Julian's face went from angry red to a sickly ash gray. He snatched the property division agreement right out of Harrison's hands and glared at me, looking as though he were truly seeing who I was for the very first time. "You set me up," he hissed through clenched teeth, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage and a dawning icy terror. "You've been plotting against me this whole time, haven't you?" "I am simply stating verifiable financial facts and dividing our legal assets," I replied, taking a slow sip of the cold tea sitting beside me. The chilled liquid slid down my throat, sharpening my focus even further. "Have you forgotten, Jules? That proprietary financial forecasting model that blew away NextGen's very first venture capital investors. I pulled 3 consecutive all-nighters surviving on espresso to build that from scratch for you. When you secured that first $5 million seed round, the institutional investors couldn't find a single flaw in the financial architecture." I leaned forward slightly, and that rigorous due diligence report, I cashed in major favors with my former senior partners at the accounting firm to get that generated. That report saved your company from stepping into at least 7 lethal contractual landmines. Did you forget that too? "Enough," Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the glass coffee table so hard my teacup rattled against its saucer. The veins in his temples bulged as he pointed a trembling finger right at my face, barking in a low, furious voice. What is the point of bringing up ancient history? You helped me with the business. Fine, that is a fact. But what did you ever do for this family? Spreadsheets, audit reports, data analytics. What else are you actually capable of? Do you have any idea how desperately my mother wanted grandchildren these past 5 years? You were always busy, always working, always on a flight. What I needed was a wife, a mother who could bear my children, not a cold-blooded corporate partner. This was undoubtedly the rehearsed narrative he and Chloe had perfected together, the shared justification they used to comfort and validate each other. During their countless stolen nights in hotel rooms, convincing themselves their betrayal was morally righteous. By saying it out loud now, he clearly believed he could claim the moral high ground and righteously condemn my failures as a traditional wife. Watching his flushed face and listening to his Swiss cheese arguments, I actually felt the urge to laugh. In fact, I did let out a short, soft laugh, but the humor didn't reach my eyes. Children, I set my teacup down, tilting my head to meet his furious, insecure glare without flinching. Jules, we actively tried to conceive for 2 solid years. We consulted 3 top fertility specialists in the country and underwent every invasive medical test available. And what was the unanimous conclusion from every single chief physician? Both of our physiological panels were entirely normal. There was 0 medical impediment to conception. So tell me, why didn't I ever get pregnant? Julian's gaze flickered sharply. He looked away, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. That was because your psychological stress levels were way too high. You spend 24 hours a day obsessing over corporate risk and financial defaults. Of course, your hormone balance was entirely wrecked. That was your own personal failure. He tried force-feeding me the blame, but the aggressive conviction had drained out of his voice. Right. My smirk deepened, though my voice dropped to a glacial chill. Then explain to me how Chloe magically managed to get pregnant by accident on her very first try with you and hit the biological jackpot with boy-girl twins, no less. Her corporate administrative job isn't exactly low-stress, Jules. From what I recall, she's constantly on extreme crash diets to maintain her figure, and her lifestyle habits are far more chaotic and irregular than mine ever were. Why is it that when it comes to her, every basic law of reproductive medicine simply ceases to apply? Those words struck like poison needles, piercing straight through his fragile, arrogant facade. His breath caught in his throat, the color draining completely from his cheeks. A flash of intense panic crossed his eyes before he desperately tried to mask it with feigned indignation. Don't be so sarcastic and bitter, he countered, his neck stiffening as he tried to defend her. Chloe just has a naturally healthy constitution. She isn't a stressed-out corporate machine who pulls all-nighters every week like you. His rebuttal was so flimsy and pathetic it barely convinced the air in the room, let alone me. I see. That explains it. I nodded slowly, acting as if I accepted his ridiculous medical theory, and dropped the subject entirely. I stood up, walked over to the entryway, and grabbed the handle of a sleek silver-rimmed suitcase leaning against the wall. If there are no legal objections to the settlement terms, sign the document. Once you sign, you can take every single one of these boxes out of my penthouse. I paused, my hand resting on the silver handle. Oh, by the way, inside the bottom compartment of the antique safe in your home office is that PC Philips Celestial Complication watch you spent 2 years pulling strings to acquire, and tucked behind your cedar cigar humidor is $50. 0 in crisp bundles of cash. I didn't touch either of them. Raising 2 infants simultaneously is going to be exceptionally expensive. Consider those my modest parting gifts to your children. Julian's face shifted rapidly from crimson to chalk white, his chest heaving as he struggled for air. He glared at me with eyes that looked ready to spit fire, yet burning beneath the rage was the helpless terror of a man who knew he had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. Beside him, Attorney Harrison leaned in and whispered something urgently into his ear, likely advising him that further stubborn resistance was legally futile, and his smartest tactical move was to sign immediately and salvage whatever equity he could before I unleashed worse. Julian ground his murs together, practically ripping the Mont Blanc pen out of Harrison's hand, and violently slashed his signature across the bottom of the property division agreement. The heavy tip of the pen actually tore through the thick parchment paper with a sharp, aggressive scratch. With the document signed, Julian looked like a rooster that had just lost a brutal cockfight. The arrogant swagger he had marched in with was completely eradicated, leaving behind only a brittle, hollow shell of bravado. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated malice. "Don't get too smug, Elena," he hissed, every word scraped out from between his teeth. "You're going to regret this. You're going to spend the rest of your sad life clutching your bank accounts and your audit reports. And you are going to die completely alone. But me? I have Chloe. I have a son and a daughter. I am the actual winner in this life. Just watch me." I ignored his pathetic loser sermon entirely. I simply stood by and watched in silence as he, Attorney Harrison, and two assistants they called up from the lobby, frantically carted the towering stacks of cardboard boxes out of my apartment. Within 10 minutes, the entryway was completely empty with a heavy solid Times thud. The custom oak front door swung shut, locking out the noise, the drama, and the suffocatingly toxic atmosphere. The penthouse fell completely silent. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city grid below. The evening rush hour traffic flowed like rivers of white and red light along the downtown expressways. In the distance, the corporate neon signs were just beginning to flicker on, illuminating the cold, magnificent skyline of Chicago. The actual winner in this life. Jules, your definition of winning is so superficial and pathetic. It's almost funny. You have absolutely no concept of the Category 5 hurricane that is currently heading straight for your life. I walked back to the sofa and picked up my iPhone. The screen was still displaying the hospital photo Julian had texted me, the happy little family of 3. I swiped out of the message thread, opened my contacts, and scrolled down until I found a number saved under the name Times Beatrice Montgomery, mother-in-law. I had barely used this number since my relationship with Julian began to deteriorate over his demands for a traditional housewife. Our last substantive contact had been that strange 2-hour and 17-minute marathon call 7 days ago. I opened a blank message template and typed out a single precise sentence. Julian and Chloe recently welcomed boy and girl twins. He is overjoyed and mentioned he plans to bring the babies back to Savannah next weekend to host a grand celebration at the family estate. Just wanted to share the happy news with you, Beatrice. My thumb hovered over the send icon for a fraction of a second before I pressed down firmly. A soft chime confirmed the message had been delivered. Without a shred of hesitation, I immediately tapped Julian and Chloe's contact profiles and permanently blocked them across every cellular and social media platform. I purged their records from my phone entirely. When the digital house cleaning was done, I tossed the phone onto the sofa and walked back over to my glass whiteboard. Among the dense network of financial flows and red question marks, one specific node stood out. I picked up a blue dry erase marker and uncapped it. Right next to the massive red question mark, I slowly printed 2 words: Game on. This was merely the overture. The real show was just about to start. Julian moved even faster than I anticipated. Just 3 days after our divorce decree was formally finalized by the judge, I spotted his latest public post while browsing Instagram from a burner account. It was a carousel of 9 professional photographs, accompanied by a nauseatingly sentimental caption. From now on, 1 + 1 = 4. Grateful for everything in my life. Excited for our bright future together. In the photos, Chloe was dressed in plush designer loungewear, her hair tied back in a loose, casual bun, her face artfully free of heavy makeup as she cradled the 2 infants in her arms. She looked at the cameras with a gaze so dripping with maternal sweetness it looked staged for a parenting magazine. Julian stood behind her, his arms wrapped securely around her shoulders, his chin resting gently on the top of her head. His face radiated an unmistakable glow of arrogant pride and patriarchal accomplishment. The setting was the living room of their new luxury home, decorated in soft, warm earth tones I had never seen before, overflowing with high-end baby swings, organic plush toys, and golden sunlight streaming across the hardwood floors. It looked like the ultimate picture of domestic bliss. The comment section beneath the post had erupted into a massive virtual celebration among our professional and social circles. Mr. Montgomery, you are crushing it. Thriving business and a gorgeous family, the true definition of a winner. Your wife is stunning and the babies are little angels. Congratulations, boy-girl twins. That is the ultimate biological jackpot, Jules. Your family is truly blessed. Two at once, one of each. You must have done something right in a past life, man. Cheers. Several of our mutual corporate acquaintances and university friends had left flattering celebratory remarks as well. Reading between the lines, I could easily detect their underlying awkwardness and cautious diplomacy. Everyone knew I had just been divorced, yet they were rushing to bow to the new queen. Julian was replying to almost every single comment with energetic enthusiasm. His tone was a sickening cocktail of false modesty and sheer vanity, acting like a conquering king who had just established a new dynasty and couldn't wait to display the crown jewels to the entire world. He felt justified in his arrogance. During our 5 years together, he hadn't managed to produce a single heir, yet within a year of carrying on with Chloe, he not only got a child, but hit the traditional family jackpot, a healthy son and daughter. For a man steeped to his bone marrow in old-fashioned Southern patriarchal values, a man who valued family lineage, legacy, and social standing above life itself, and for his aristocratic family who shared those exact same obsessions, this was the ultimate badge of honor. It was a glorious accomplishment that instantly washed away the moral sin of his infidelity and divorce. I scrolled calmly through the photos and the endless stream of congratulations, closed the app, and booted up my encrypted laptop. I logged into a secure two-factor authenticated email server. A new message was waiting in my inbox. The sender's address was a randomized string of alphanumeric characters, but I knew exactly who was on the other end. I clicked open the message. The body of the email was completely empty. Attached was a single encrypted zip file and a separate plain text document. The plain text file contained only a street address. I downloaded the zip file, entered the complex 16-character decryption key, and extracted the contents. Inside were 14 high-resolution digital photographs. The images showed a young man dressed in a dark gray hoodie, his face partially obscured by a black baseball cap and a surgical mask, hurriedly entering the front sliding doors of a private fertility clinic on several different dates and times. Despite his aggressive attempts at concealment, I recognized him instantly from his distinct slouched gait and the tiny discolored birthmark just below his left earlobe. It was Travis Montgomery, Julian's first cousin, 2 years younger than him. Travis held a phantom executive title at NextGen Solutions, drawing a fat 6-figure salary while spending his days slacking off, playing online poker, and partying in VIP nightclub booths. His primary life skills consisted of racking up gambling debts and crashing expensive sports cars, and the clinic in the photographs bore an impressive, highly clinical name on its brass plaque: Prime Life Reproductive Institute. This was the exact same boutique medical facility that Beatrix Montgomery had mentioned during our marathon phone call, the place where she had anxiously accompanied Chloe for a routine prenatal checkup because Chloe claimed she was feeling under the weather. I opened the plain text document and plugged the street address into my mapping software. The location pinned onto a rundown decade-old apartment complex located on the industrial outskirts of Chicago, right near a major freight distribution hub. The neighborhood was sketchy, the rent was dirt cheap, and it was roughly a 40-minute drive from Prime Life Reproductive Institute. I knew from family gossip that Travis leased a cheap studio apartment out there as a private crash pad, whenever he wanted to lie low or entertain questionable company away from his family's prying eyes. I downloaded every piece of documentation, saved them onto a secure hardware encrypted external flash drive, and typed a 2-word reply to the anonymous sender. Payment wired. With the transaction finalized, I walked into my kitchen and brewed a cup of loose leaf green tea. The crisp, slightly earthy aroma filled the quiet penthouse. Holding the warm ceramic mug, I stepped out onto the private terrace. The night air was cool against my skin, and the Chicago city lights glittered below like a vast ocean of diamonds. Every variable was tracking precisely according to my projections. With that digital errand completed, I turned my full attention to finalizing the corporate liquidation of the 15% NextGen Solutions equity stake I had stripped from Julian in the settlement. Julian's attorney, Brad Harrison, proved exceptionally efficient when handling straight corporate finance. By the following afternoon, a massive 7F-figure wire transfer had successfully cleared and settled into my designated private banking account. Staring at the notification banner on my mobile banking app, my heart rate didn't elevate by a single beat. This capital was originally mine to begin with. It was the hard-earned return on 5 years of my professional youth, countless sleepless nights of labor, and the liquidated equity of my late parents' estate. It had simply returned to its rightful owner, and very soon it would be deployed for a much larger, far more definitive purpose. Over the next several days, my life operated with the disciplined precision of a Swiss chronometer. I woke up at 7:00 a.m. sharp, completed a rigorous 1-hour workout, and was at my desk by 9:00 a.m. to execute risk consulting contracts for several independent corporate clients. My afternoons were spent in high-level meetings with my personal legal team and private wealth managers, systematically restructuring my total liquid assets and moving the entire portfolio into an offshore family trust structure. It was imperative that my capital and my future be entirely ring-fenced from my marital past. During this week, several former friends and corporate colleagues called my personal line. Their tones were universally cautious, fishing for details about the sudden divorce. I gave every single one of them the exact same standardized corporate response. We parted amicably due to irreconcilable differences in long-term life goals. Only one caller, a female executive who had attended college with both Chloe and me, finally lost her composure after several minutes of polite hesitation. She lowered her voice to an angry whisper over the line. "Elena, are you really just going to let them walk over you like this? What Chloe did is absolutely unforgivable. She's been like this since our dorm days, acting all sweet and innocent on the outside. But underneath, she's a calculating viper who will do whatever it takes to snatch anything she covets, especially if it belongs to someone else. I never dreamed she would actually stoop to stealing her best friend's husband." I cut her off smoothly, my voice entirely devoid of emotional resonance. Julian and I separated because our marriage failed. Whatever choices he made after that are his own business. My friend let out a frustrated sigh. "You don't get it, Elena. Jules is spinning a completely different story to everyone in our network. He's claiming you were an absolute nightmare to live with. Cold, controlling, and emotionally barren, and that he had no choice but to leave for his own mental health. And Chloe, she's even worse. She's playing the ultimate martyr in her little mommy circles, crying crocodile tears and claiming times you times voluntarily stepped aside because you felt guilty about not giving him children, allowing their true love to flourish. She tells everyone how sorry she feels for you. It makes me want to vomit. Those two shameless sociopaths deserve each other." "Oh, really?" I arched an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my tea. "Is that the official narrative they're running with?" "Yes. They've painted themselves as tragic romantic heroes who overcame massive obstacles to build a family. And get this, I heard from a mutual friend in Savannah that Jules is hosting a massive, lavish baby debut and naming reception at the Montgomery family estate next weekend. He's inviting every major socialite, politician, and business elite in the county to formally present Chloe and the twins. He wants to solidify his public image as the ultimate business and family patriarch." "I see." I set my teacup down on the table, a cold, humorless smile forming on my lips. "I'm sure it will be a truly magnificent celebration." After disconnecting the call, I walked over to my desk and flipped open my leather-bound calendar. Next weekend's date had already been circled twice in bright red ink. Julian's hometown was an historic old money Southern community, nestled among the marshlands and weeping oaks of South Carolina. A place where traditional etiquette, family lineage, and public reputation were valued above the law. In a town like that, social gossip traveled faster than fiber optic broadband, and a public scandal could permanently destroy a family standing for generations. If a prominent family suffered even a minor embarrassment, the entire county knew about it before noon, and it remained prime country club chatter for the next 30 years. Jules, the grander you build your stage and the more high society spectators you invite to the theater, the more catastrophic the bodily trauma when you get shoved off the platform. I picked up my phone and dialed a specialized number. The line rang 6 times before it clicked open. From the receiver came a warm, distinctly Southern female voice carrying a trace of exhaustion but undeniable genuine affection. "Hello, who's calling?" "Aunt Martha, it's me, Alina," I said softly, allowing my tone to relax into familiar warmth. "Alina, sweetheart, my goodness." Aunt Martha's voice jumped 3 octaves, instantly flooded with pleasant surprise. "What a wonderful treat. Why are you calling your old auntie? How have you been? Are you working yourself to death up in that windy city? Have you been eating properly?" "I'm doing wonderful, Aunt Martha. How are you and Uncle Robert doing?" "Oh, we're just fine, darling. Just fine, though. Your uncle's gout is acting up again with all this humid weather we've been having." After a few minutes of pleasant family catch-up, I shifted the conversation to my primary objective. "Aunt Martha, will you be around next weekend? I have some personal business to attend to down in Savannah and I was planning to fly in for a couple of days." "Next weekend?" "Why, of course, honey. If my little Elena is coming home, I will clear my social calendar completely," Martha answered instantly, though her tone quickly shifted into maternal concern. "Is everything all right, sweetheart? Did you and Julian have a falling out?" "Just the other day at the country club, I bumped into Mrs. Henderson, and she said she saw Julian's mother, Beatrice, looking like she'd seen a ghost, sighing and wringing her hands like the world was ending. But when folks asked her what was wrong, she clammed up tight." Aunt Martha worked as a senior administrative director at the county courthouse. While it wasn't a corporate suite role, her position placed her at the absolute epicenter of local municipal gossip. She knew everyone, heard everything, possessed an unshakable moral compass, and absolutely despised high society hypocrisy. "There are just a few legal and financial matters I need to tie up in person. I'll explain everything over dinner when I get there," I said smoothly. "Oh, and Aunt Martha, please keep my trip entirely confidential for now. Don't mention it to anyone at the club, especially not anyone connected to the Montgomery family." The line went silent for 2 beats. With her decades of navigating small-town politics, Aunt Martha immediately sensed the underlying gravity of my request. Her tone hardened into serious reliability. "Understood. Honey, you don't worry about a thing. Just send me your flight details, and I'll pick you up at the airport myself." "No need to drive out to the airport, Aunt Martha. I'll rent a car and drive into town. I'll call you the second I check into my hotel." "All right, darling. You travel safe, you hear?" Ending the call with Aunt Martha felt like locking the final deadbolt on a vault. The afternoon before the grand Montgomery family baby debut, I drove a sleek, inconspicuous rental car into the picturesque, moss-draped southern town where Julian had been raised. The town was framed by slow-moving tidal rivers, its historic cobblestone streets polished smooth by centuries of carriage wheels and luxury sedans, antebellum mansions with sprawling wraparound porches and pristine white columns lined the avenues, the humid air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and salt water. Time seemed to move at a deliberate aristocratic crawl here. Without alerting a soul, I checked into a newly constructed boutique hotel situated on the eastern edge of the historic district. Securing a top-floor corner suite using my corporate ID, my suite was on the 8th floor. Drawing back the sheer curtains, I had an unobstructed bird's-eye view of the sprawling Montgomery family estate, just 3 blocks away. The manicured front lawn of the estate had already been transformed into an extravagant event venue. A massive cream-colored reception tent was erected across the grass, decorated with elaborate floral archways, golden chandeliers, and hundreds of pastel blue and pink balloons. A massive silk banner stretched across the second-story balcony of the main house, embossed with shimmering gold calligraphy, celebrating the baptism and debut of heirs, Montgomery boy and girl twins. The Montgomerys were old Southern aristocracy. Julian's father was a retired federal district judge who commanded immense local respect, and Julian was widely viewed as the most successful crown jewel of his generation, the brilliant big city corporate CEO whom local high society matrons constantly held up as the gold standard to their own underperforming sons. This baby debut wasn't merely a party to celebrate two infants, it was a loud, triumphant declaration to the entire state that the Montgomery dynasty had secured its lineage, its wealth, and its future. I pulled the heavy blackout curtain shut, opened my laptop, and connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot. I initiated a comprehensive final review of the digital payload I had prepared for tomorrow's festivities. It was a standard high-speed black USB flash drive containing a meticulously compiled forensic-level investigation report executed by a top-tier private intelligence firm over the past 3 weeks. First, high-resolution surveillance timestamps confirming Travis Montgomery had entered Prime Life Reproductive Institute on 7 distinct occasions over the past year, complete with vehicular registration tracking and timestamped entry logs. Second, a comprehensive telecom metadata summary detailing extensive, late-night cellular communications between Chloe and Travis over the 12 months preceding the pregnancy. While the audio wasn't recorded, the frequency and timing of the calls correlated precisely with Chloe's initial fertility clinic consultations and subsequent ovulation cycles. Third, a detailed background investigation into Prime Life Reproductive Institute itself. While operating as a fully licensed medical facility on paper, the institute quietly catered to ultra-wealthy clients seeking specialized off-the-books reproductive services. The report documented their private donor concierge program, which allowed clients to secretly select specific biological specimens from family members or associates to circumvent genetic screening red flags. Travis Montgomery was formally cataloged in their database as an active verified donor under the clinical profile identifier donor K7. Finally, an authoritative medical analytics evaluation drafted by a board-certified reproductive endocrinologist. Utilizing the few candid lifestyle photographs and fitness tracker data Julian had proudly posted of Chloe online over the years, combined with her documented clinical history, the report calculated the statistical probability of Chloe conceiving fraternal boy-girl twins naturally at less than 0.4%. Conversely, the probability of achieving this precise biological outcome via targeted in vitro fertilization utilizing pre-screened embryos was calculated at over 88%. Every disparate data point linked together seamlessly, forming an airtight forensic masterpiece. Chloe had never conceived naturally with Julian. She had utilized Prime Life Reproductive Institute to undergo an IVF cycle using third-party donor sperm and potentially donor eggs as well, given her own dietary restrictions and medical profile. The biological father of those was none other than Julian's deadbeat cousin Travis. She had staged an elaborate melodramatic biological fraud, successfully duping Julian, his aristocratic parents, and the entire high society community. Her rationale for selecting Travis was coldly pragmatic, likely resting on 3 pillars. First, as a weak-willed, financially dependent family member, Travis was easily manipulated and controlled through bribery or blackmail. Second, by utilizing a direct Montgomery blood relative, any future routine genetic tests or physical family resemblances would easily pass casual scrutiny without raising alarm bells. Third, Travis was broke and desperate for cash, making his silence cheap to buy. It was an exceptionally calculating, ruthless scheme. However, Chloe had made 2 fatal miscalculations in her risk assessment model. First, She failed to factor in the terrifying volcanic wrath of an old-money Southern matriarch, who valued family honor, genetic lineage, and social prestige above life itself. She never anticipated what Beatrice Montgomery would do when confronted with the reality that her celebrated grandchildren were the product of a cheap medical deception mission involving the family's most embarrassing relative. Second, she completely underestimated me. She assumed that because I was a professional woman who valued logic over melodrama, I would simply absorb the emotional trauma of infidelity, sign whatever papers were put in front of me, and quietly vanish into the corporate background like a defeated victim. She forgot or simply lacked the intellectual capacity to comprehend that a senior corporate risk auditor's greatest professional asset is the ability to detect anomalous data patterns beneath a placid surface, systematically assemble the evidence, and execute a lethal precision strike precisely when the target is most vulnerable. I never enter a boardroom or a battlefield without a complete exit strategy. As the evening shadows lengthened across the historic town, I changed into an inconspicuous dark gray athletic tracksuit, pulled a black baseball cap low over my eyes, tucked my long hair securely up inside the brim, and slipped out of the hotel via the side exit. I blended seamlessly into the warm, bustling evening foot traffic along the historic waterfront. I stepped into a classic wood-paneled local tavern popular with the Old Town crowd, sliding into a dimly lit corner booth and ordering a simple club sandwich and iced tea. The tavern was packed and lively, and nearly every table around me was buzzing with excited chatter about tomorrow's massive Montgomery estate celebration. Can you believe it? Old Judge Montgomery's boy, the big-shot CEO up in Chicago, is throwing the biggest baby debut this town has seen since the governor's inauguration. Boy and girl twins. Now, that is what I call carrying on the family legacy. You said it. Jules was always the smartest kid in our graduating class. And now he's running a multi-million-dollar tech firm, and his new wife, beautiful Southern girl, super sweet, and blessed them with an heir and a spare on her first try. That family lives a charmed life, I swear. Hey, whatever happened to his first wife? Didn't he marry some corporate financial executive up north a few years back? Oh, her. I heard from Beatrix Bridge Club that the first wife was an absolute nightmare, a cold-blooded workaholic who cared more about her laptop than making a home. They were married for 5 solid years, and she couldn't even give him a child. You really think an old family like the Montgomery would put up with a barren corporate iceberg forever? Jules divested and upgraded just in time. This new girl actually knows how to take care of a man and build a real family. I kept my head down, methodically eating my sandwich in silence. Envy, disdain, ignorant, small-town speculation. Every toxic syllable drifted clearly into my booth. It was obvious that Julian and Chloe had successfully weaponized his parents' social standing to completely dominate the local narrative. The entire county was currently convinced I was a cold, infertile failure who had been rightfully discarded by the town's golden boy, while Chloe was being elevated as the fertile, loving savior of the Montgomery family dynasty. Perfect. In financial risk management, the higher a fraudulent asset is artificially pumped, the more catastrophic and absolute the market correction. When the bubble finally pops, public sentiment is a two-edged sword. When it swings back, it cuts deeper than any legal injunction. I paid my tab in cash, pulled the brim of my cap down even lower, and slipped out of the tavern into the humid southern night. Back in my hotel suite, the city had settled into quiet darkness. Out my window, the Montgomery estate was still blazing with floodlights, the faint sounds of clinking glass, and system checks drifting through the night air as heroes finalized the setup for tomorrow's grand event. The entire Montgomery household was undoubtedly drowning in a manic, intoxicating cocktail of pride, vanity, and anticipation. Julian and Chloe were likely lying in bed right now, dreaming of how they would bask in the adulation of the county's elite tomorrow morning, officially cementing their status as the ultimate corporate and domestic power couple. They had no earthly idea that the magnificent high society stage they had spent months building was less than 12 hours away from transforming into ground zero of the most humiliating scandal in the state's modern history. I sat down at my desk, booted up my laptop, and took the encrypted zip file containing the Prime Life Reproductive Institute records, the forensic donor reports, the surveillance photos, and the medical probability analysis. Using an untraceable secure onion-routed email address, I forwarded the entire digital payload directly to Aunt Martha's personal inbox. I included only one simple instruction in the body of the text. From an anonymous source who cares deeply about the integrity of the Montgomery family legacy, please ensure Mrs. Beatrix Montgomery reviews these documents in private before the reception begins tomorrow morning. Aunt Martha had spent 30 years working in the municipal court system. She was universally respected for her ironclad integrity, her sharp mind, and her absolute refusal to tolerate moral hypocrisy. More importantly, decades ago, she and Beatrix Montgomery had been close social acquaintances before Old Town politics caused a minor drift. Despite the distance, a baseline of mutual respect remained. She was the absolute perfect delivery mechanism for this asset. Given Beatrix's fanatical obsession with her family's genetic lineage and high society reputation, viewing these documents would trigger an immediate volcanic psychological reaction. Her aristocratic pride would override any social decorum, compelling her to act with ruthless, destructive decisiveness to purge the deception from her house, and that was precisely the catalyst I needed. The most effective demolitions occur when the property owner willingly detonates the charges from inside the building. After confirming the email had successfully transmitted and decrypted on the receiving server, I shut down my laptop and switched off the desk lamp. The suite plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint, shimmering glow of the floodlights bouncing off the Montgomery estate 3 blocks away, casting long, shadowy silhouettes across my ceiling. I lay down on the crisp hotel linen and closed my eyes. Outside, the steady chirping of southern cicadas blended with the distant hum of traffic, creating the unique, heavy silence of a southern summer night. Tomorrow was going to be an exceptionally productive day. The following morning broke with brilliant southern sunshine. The sky was a cloudless, vibrant blue, and the golden sunlight poured generously over the sprawling grounds of the Montgomery estate, illuminating the manicured lawns with striking clarity. The massive cream-colored tent, the shimmering gold banners, the towering pastel balloon arches, every detail looked aggressively expensive and vibrant. By 1000 a.m., the driveways lining the estate were completely gridlocked with luxury sedans, imported SUVs, and black car services. The absolute cream of local high society had arrived. Retired federal judges, wealthy real estate developers, local politicians, bank presidents, and prominent socialites all mingled across the lawn, champagne flutes in hand. Julian looked like he had stepped straight out of a GQ spread. He wore a bespoke navy blue Tom Ford suit, his hair coed to absolute perfection, standing at the head of the main entrance steps to receive his guests. His face was practically glowing with an intoxicating blend of supreme confidence, corporate pride, and arrogant satisfaction. Beside him stood his father, the retired Judge Montgomery, impeccably dressed in a classic Southern Sears sucker suit, though the judge had recently suffered from mild health issues that left him looking slightly pale. His posture was rigid with pride as he greeted old colleagues, his eyes gleaming with the deep satisfaction of a patriarch whose family name was secure. I didn't walk over to the reception. Instead, I sat comfortably in the leather armchair of my 8th-floor hotel suite, sipping fresh coffee while looking through a pair of high-powered stabilized military binoculars aimed directly at the main pavilion. At the same time, my iPad was propped on the table, streaming a crystal-clear, high-definition live video feed. Aunt Martha had executed her role flawlessly, claiming she wanted to help with the morning setup. She had arrived at the estate early and quietly placed her secondary smartphone on a floral stand near the front row of VIP seating, disguised by a decorative arrangement of white hydrangeas. The camera angle provided a perfect unobstructed view of the main stage and the front guest tables. On my screen, the reception was a whirlwind of high society chatter and clinking silver. Chloe sat at the center of the VIP pavilion, completely surrounded by a fawning circle of wealthy country club matrons. She was dressed to the nines today, wearing a custom-tailored blush-pink Chanel boulet dress that complemented her delicate features. Her hair styled in an elegant chignon secured by a pearl hairpin. Nestled in her arms were the twin infants, both dressed in matching hand-embroidered, white silk christening gowns. She kept her head tilted slightly downward, displaying a picture-perfect look of modest maternal sweetness as she soaked in the endless stream of flattery and admiration from the surrounding women. Yet, beneath the modest act, the raw, triumphant vanity flashing in her eyes was unmistakable. The entire Montgomery clan appeared to be floating on an expanding cloud of absolute social triumph. My gaze, however, bypassed the happy couple and focused entirely on another figure sitting at the primary family table, Beatrice Montgomery. Beatrice was dressed in formal Southern royalty attire, a royal blue velvet tailored suit with a silk scarf draped gracefully over her shoulders, her hair coedited into a stiff, immaculately sprayed salon style. To the casual observer mingling on the lawn, she looked like any other proud grandmother hosting a lavish country club reception. But through the optical zoom of my binoculars, I could see the truth. Beatrix's facial muscles were locked in a state of rigid, unnatural tension. Her polite conversational smiles were completely frozen, her eyes dead and glassy. Every few seconds her gaze would drift away from the guests and stare into empty space with a look of pure icy desolation. Her movements were jerky and erratic. When a catering waiter poured tea into her bone china cup, her hand trembled so aggressively, she nearly spilled the scalding liquid across the white linen tablecloth. A digital notification popped onto my iPad screen, a text from Aunt Martha. She saw the file. Oh baby, did she see it? She showed up at my front porch at 6 a.m. sharp. Her eyes were bloodshot red. Looked like she hadn't slept a wink all night. I handed her the printed portfolio. She sat on my living room sofa and read every single page, word, for a solid hour. Didn't say one word. Her knuckles turned dead white from gripping the paper so hard. When she got up to leave, her whole body was shaking like a leaf. I tried to grab her arm to steady her, but she just pulled away, stared at me with ice in her eyes, and said, "I understand." I tapped out a single character reply, "Good." On the live video feed, the hired master of ceremonies, a prominent local television broadcast personality, stepped onto the raised stage, tapping his microphone to call for the guests' attention. With smooth, professional charisma, he began whipping the crowd into an enthusiastic, celebratory mood. His introductory remarks were a masterclass in high society flattery. He showered praise upon the Montgomery family's storied legal lineage, lauded Julian's meteoric rise as a Chicago tech titan, complimented Chloe's beauty and grace, and poetically described the twin infants as a miraculous blessing bestowed by heaven itself. The manicured lawn erupted into polite, synchronized applause. When the opening remarks concluded, the MC raised his voice dramatically. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, please direct your attention to the center stage as we welcome the stars of today's celebration, the proud parents and their beautiful new heirs. Let's give them a warm Southern welcome." The background music shifted seamlessly into an uplifting, triumphant classical melody. Julian straightened his posture, buttoned his Tom Ford jacket, and led the way up the carpeted steps onto the stage. He turned to Chloe, gently taking the baby boy from her arms and holding the infant proudly against his chest. With his free hand, he gripped Chloe's waist affectionately. Chloe, holding the baby girl, offered the crowd a shy, radiant smile as she leaned her head against Julian's shoulder. As the family of four stood squarely in the center of the stage, the applause swelled into a thunderous ovation, accompanied by enthusiastic cheers from Julian's old college buddies. Julian cradled his son, looking out over the sea of county elite. His face was illuminated by a blinding smile, an absolute unadulterated expression of supreme arrogance and victory. He cleared his throat directly into the microphone, his deep voice echoing across the estate grounds, heavy with suppressed emotion. "Thank you. Thank you all so very much," he began, pausing to let the applause settle. "To all of our friends, family, and distinguished colleagues who traveled from near and far to celebrate the baptism and formal debut of my son, Alexander Vance Montgomery, and my daughter, Caroline Grace Montgomery. I am profoundly humbled by your presence today." He took a theatrical breath, his chest expanding. "Standing here today, looking out at all of you, the weight I feel on my shoulders is not the pressure of business or expectations. It is the overwhelming weight of pure gratitude and family duty. Because today I can finally stand before you and say, the Montgomery family legacy is secure." The crowd erupted again, several older gentlemen raising their champagne flutes in a formal toast. Down in the front row, two of Julian's childhood friends actually wiped tears of sentimentality from their eyes. Julian waited for the noise to subside before executing the next phase of his performance. He turned his body slightly, gazing at Chloe with an expression of intense theatrical devotion, his voice dropping an octave into a soft, intimate register. "More than anything, I want to express my eternal gratitude to my incredible wife, Chloe." He paused, letting the silence build for emotional impact. "She gave me something I searched for my entire life. She gave me a true, loving home. She taught me the true meaning of warmth, partnership, and family sacrifice. Her grace, her resilience, and her unwavering love sustained me through my darkest professional hours. And now she has given me the ultimate miracle, these two perfect, beautiful children. Chloe, thank you from the bottom of my soul." On cue, Chloe lowered her eyes modestly, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink as she projected a masterclass image of emotional gratitude and wayly devotion. A collective sigh of adoration rippled through the female guests in the front rows. Julian turned back to face his parents' VIP table, his chest puffed out, and finally, "I want to thank my mother and father. Thank you for your decades of love, your moral guidance, and your unwavering belief in me. Specifically, I want to thank my mother, who has sacrificed so much of her own life and energy for the preservation of this family, and who has showered Chloe and these children with boundless love and support." His speech was meticulously calculated, a rhetorical masterpiece designed to stroke every ego, check every social box, and permanently enshrine himself as the humble, grateful, successful corporate patriarch who had it all. Nearly everyone in the audience was deeply moved. Several older matriarchs nodded in vigorous approval, whispering to their neighbors about what a fine, upstanding Southern gentleman Julian had become. Julian was hitting his stride, his delivery becoming more fluid and passionate, acting as if he were already envisioning his next massive corporate IPO or a future political campaign. Right at that exact second, without a single word of warning, Beatrix Montgomery stood up from her seat at the VIP table. Her movement was so violent and abrupt that her heavy mahogany dining chair scraped backward across the brick patio with a sharp screech that cut cleanly through Julian's amplified voice. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the middle of a formal Southern toast, it sounded like a gunshot. The tables immediately surrounding the family pavilion fell silent, guests turning their heads in confusion. The professional MC on stage instantly sensed the awkward break in decorum and attempted to smooth it over with smooth event management reflexes. He stepped toward the edge of the stage, flashing a brilliant camera-ready smile. "Well, it looks like our proud grandmother just can't wait another second to come up here and share a blessing of her own with the new heirs." Before the MC could finish his polished transition, Beatrix turned her head and fixed him with a stare so icy, sharp, and terrifyingly desolate that the words literally died in his throat. The professional smile melted off his face. He instinctively clamped his mouth shut and took 2 quick steps backward, retreating into the shadows of the stage. Julian's speech ground to a complete halt. He lowered the microphone. Blinking down at his mother in confusion and growing irritation, his brow knitted together, his eyes conveying a clear, annoyed warning to her not to ruin his perfect moment. "Mother?" He spoke into the microphone. his tone carrying a tense edge of forced politeness. "Are you all right? Just sit tight for one more minute. We're almost finished with the presentation." Beatrice ignored him completely. She stepped away from the table and began walking toward the stage. Her strides were slow, measured, and unnaturally rigid. Her high-end designer heels struck the wooden steps of the pavilion with a heavy rhythmic times thud-thud-tut that felt like a gavel pounding against the chest of everyone watching. She reached the center of the stage and stopped directly in front of Julian. For several excruciating seconds, she simply stared into his eyes. Her expression was an unreadable, terrifying tempest of grief, fury, and aristocratic humiliation, a storm that rapidly crystallized into absolute glacial resolve. Then she lowered her gaze, her eyes fixed onto the infant boy swaddled in blue silk, who was squirming and blinking up at the bright chandeliers from Julian's arms. Julian instinctively tightened his grip on the baby, leaning back slightly as a wave of defensive unease washed over him. "Mother, do you want to hold Alexander? Just wait until after the toast, we're in the middle of," without uttering a word. Beatrice reached out. Her hands were rigid and surprisingly aggressive as she seized the swaddled infant and forcibly wrenched him out of Julian's arms. Julian was caught entirely off guard. His arms were suddenly empty, his hands hovering uselessly in the air, as his face flushed with embarrassment and shock. "Mother, careful. What are you doing?" Beatrice acted as if he didn't exist. Holding the infant securely in both hands, she lifted the baby up to her eye level. She didn't blink. Her gaze swept over the child's features like an optical scanner, examining the slope of the forehead, the shape of the eyebrows, the bridge of the nose, the curve of the jawline. She scrutinized every single millimeter of the child's face with agonizing, prolonged slowness. The silence stretched out to a breaking point across the entire 2-acre estate. The celebratory music had mysteriously cut out. The only sound left was the rustle of wind through the weeping oaks and the nervous shuffling of 300 high society guests, holding their collective breath, watching this bizarre family drama unfold. Chloe stood frozen a few feet away, clutching the baby girl to her chest. The practiced, radiant smile had completely evaporated from her face, replaced by a creeping, paralyzed dread. Her lips parted slightly as she tried to form words, but her vocal cords refused to cooperate. Instinctively, she took a slow step backward, clutching the infant girl so tightly the child began to squirm. Julian's face had darkened from annoyance to genuine alarm. He looked at his mother, then at Chloe, and finally back at the infant boy being scrutinized in his mother's hands. A faint, terrifying ringing sound began to echo in the back of his mind. Beatrice stared at the baby for 30 full seconds. Finally, very slowly, she turned her head. Her gaze swung like a sniper's rifle, locking squarely onto Chloe's pale, bloodless face. Beatrix's lower lip began to tremble violently. It wasn't the tremor of an old woman breaking down in tears. It was the physical manifestation of a volcanic destructive rage reaching critical mass. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It was raspy, dry, and low. Yet, because of the dead silence gripping the property, and because she was standing directly adjacent to the podium microphone, every single word sliced through the air like a razor blade, broadcasting clearly across the entire estate. "Miss Chloe." She addressed her daughter-in-law by her first name with chilling, formal detachment, stripping away any familial intimacy. Chloe's entire body flinched, as if she had been touched with a live wire in her arms. The infant girl was startled by the sudden tension and let out a sharp, wailing cry. That high-pitched baby scream echoed across the silent lawn like a siren, making the atmosphere instantly suffocating. Beatrice acted as if she couldn't hear the crying child at all. She kept her dead, burning eyes fixed on Chloe, taking a step closer as she articulated every syllable with absolute bone-chilling clarity. "Tell me," Beatrice said, thrusting the swaddled infant boy slightly forward in her hands, her voice suddenly spiking into a sharp, hysterical screech that echoed off the white columns of the main house. "Whose bastard seat is this child?" Boom! The collective gasp from the audience was audible. "Mother, have you lost your mind?" Julian panicked, the blood draining from his face as he lunged forward, grabbing his mother's arm in a desperate attempt to silence her, his voice cracked with sheer terror and rage. "What kind of insane nonsense are you spouting? Today is their baptism. Are you having a nervous breakdown?" Beatrice didn't even look at him. With a violent, aggressive wrench of her shoulder, she broke his grip, keeping her burning eyes trained exclusively on Chloe. The aristocratic composure she had maintained for decades was completely gone, replaced by the savage fury of a queen whose throne had been defiled by common thieves. "Me? Lose my mind?" Beatrix let out a short, terrifying cackle that sent shivers down the spines of the guests sitting in the front row. "If I had truly lost my mind, Julian Montgomery, I wouldn't have bitten my tongue all morning just to stand here and ask this manipulative little to her face in front of the whole county." She raised her trembling right hand and pointed a rigid finger straight between Chloe's eyes. Her entire arm was shaking with rage. "You answer me!" Beatrix screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing over the manicured lawns. "You look me in the eye and tell this whole town. What exact medical procedures did you undergo at Prime Life Reproductive Institute? Who is the biological father of the children inside those blankets?" Chloe's face turned the color of chalk, her arms locked around the crying baby girl, her knees buckling slightly as her lips stammered uncontrollably. Mother Beatrice, please, you're scaring the babies. Let's go inside the house and talk about this. Please don't do this here. Shut your mouth." Beatrice barked with such ferocious authority that the professional MC standing in the shadows actually dropped his clipboard onto the stage floor with a loud clatter. With her free hand, Beatrice reached into her designer leather handbag, grabbed a thick brown manila envelope, and slammed it down onto the acrylic podium with all her physical strength. "You parade around this town every single day, bragging about your miraculous boy-girl twins. You act like you're some blessed fertility goddess who saved the Montgomery family line." Beatrix's chest heaved, her voice vibrating with raw, unadulterated hatred. "Did you think Julian was the only one you could play for a fool?" She snatched the envelope, ripped the top open, and pulled out a thick stack of printed forensic documents and 8x10 surveillance photographs, shaking them violently in Chloe's face. "These two infants have not one single drop of Julian's blood in their veins. They are not his children." The entire 300-person guest pavilion exploded into absolute chaos. High society matrons gasped in horror, several dropping their crystal champagne flutes onto the brick patio, where they shattered into pieces. In the VIP section, Judge Montgomery attempted to stand up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson before he slumped back into his chair, clutching his chest as two retired physicians rushed to his side. "What the hell are you talking about?" Julian's eyes were wide and bloodshot, his voice dropping into a panicked, feral growl. He grabbed his mother's shoulder again, shaking her. "Mother, stop this right now. You are destroying our family name. Stop lying." "Me lying?" Beatrix turned on her son like a rabid animal, her voice reaching a deafening crescendo. "If I were lying, would I be standing here destroying my own family crest in front of everyone I have known since childhood?" She turned back to Chloe, her eyes blazing. 3 weeks ago, when you claimed you needed to go to the clinic for a routine checkup, I insisted on tagging along because I was worried about my future grandchildren. Did you think because I'm 65 years old, my eyes are failing me? Did you think I wouldn't notice you slipping away to the third-floor specialized donor wing? Did you think I wouldn't recognize my own nephew's name on a patient consent log? With a violent flick of her wrist, Beatrice hurled the thick stack of documents straight into Chloe's face. The heavy parchment papers and glossy photographs dispersed in the air, raining down across the stage and fluttering off the edges onto the front row dining tables. Several curious guests instantly snatched up the scattered sheets. Within seconds, their expressions shifted from shock to absolute morbid horror. On the very top page, printed in bold, undeniable black ink beneath the header of Prime Life Reproductive Institute, was an executed medical agreement, intrauterine insemination, Third-party donor IVF consent form, patient Chloe Vance. Biological donor identifier K7. Julian stood completely frozen, his expensive boots rooted to the stage. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black as he stared down at the scattered papers at his feet. A horrific, suffocating pressure seized his throat. He tried to inhale, but his lungs felt like they were filled with wet cement. Beatrice wasn't finished. She turned her head, her eyes sweeping across the crowded lawn like a searchlight, until she spotted a young man wearing a loud floral designer shirt, trying to discreetly duck behind a catering tent near the open bar. "Travis Montgomery!" Beatrix screamed, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd like a bullwhip. The young man froze instantly. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a cornered rat. He instinctively took a step backward, but collided with a table of startled country club members, nearly knocking over a silver punch bowl. Beatrice pointed her finger directly at him, her voice dripping with venomous disgust. "You pathetic freeloading parasite. Don't you dare try to hide. That Prime Life Donor Code K7 belongs exclusively to you. You visited that fertility clinic 7 distinct times over the past 12 months. Every single time, you told your mother you were driving up to Chicago to interview for a consulting job. The only job you were executing was filling a plastic cup so your degenerate cuisine-in-law could get pregnant." The entire estate lawn descended into a deafening uproar. "Good Lord in heaven!" A prominent bank president whispered loudly from table 4. "She used his cousin's sperm," an Old Town socialite gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "She bred with that deadbeat Travis just to pass the babies off as Montgomery. This is sick. It's an absolute abomination." Travis's legs buckled. He grabbed the edge of the catering table to keep from collapsing onto the grass. "Aunt Beatrice, I swear I didn't do anything. It wasn't me, that's a lie." Beatrice marched to the edge of the stage, her face twisted in rage. "You didn't do it? Then explain to this entire town why your verified state driver's license copy is attached to the Prime Life Donor Registry files right here on this table. Explain why the head clinical nurse identified your photograph instantly. Explain why private investigators recorded you walking through their front doors 7 times in high-definition video." Tears of pure humiliated rage finally spilled over Beatrix's mascara-stained eyelashes, streaking down her powdered cheeks. She looked out at the sea of horrified faces, people she had hosted for charity galas, people she had played bridge with for 40 years, and her voice broke into a ragged sob of absolute defeat. "I have spent my entire life upholding the dignity, honor, and reputation of the Montgomery family name," Beatrice cried out, her hand trembling against her chest. "I genuinely believed God had finally blessed my son with a rightful heir to carry our legacy into the future." Instead, she spun around, fixing Chloe with a glare of murder. "This gutter-born viper secretly bought sperm from our family's most pathetic degenerate, planted third-party embryos in her womb, and paraded those bastards into my house. She let me throw lavish showers. She let my husband set up trust funds. She let us stand here today and become the laughingstock of the entire state of South Carolina." Chloe's psychological defenses shattered completely. In her arms, the infant girl was screaming hysterically. Chloe ignored the child entirely, her face contorted in absolute panic as she saw the circle of social death closing in around her. No, it's not true," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she stumbled forward, reaching out to grab Julian's Tom Ford jacket. "Jules, listen to me. Jules, please, your mother is lying. She's hated me from the start. She fabricated those papers because she wants to destroy us. Jules, tell them." She tried to throw herself against his chest, but Julian reacted as if she were covered in boiling acid. With a violent, revulsed shove, he threw her backward. His movement was so aggressive and instantaneous that Chloe lost her balance, stumbling hard against the acrylic podium and nearly dropping the screaming infant onto the stage floor. She froze, looking up at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. Julian's face was unrecognizable. The handsome, polished corporate CEO was gone. In his place stood a broken, hyperventilating lunatic. His skin was mottled with purple patches of rage, his lips trembling violently as he stared at her. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal, the financial cost, the public humiliation, the destruction of his manhood was crushing his psyche in real time. "You lied to me," Julian croaked, his voice sounding like two pieces of sandpaper grinding together. He took a threatening step toward her, his fist clenched so tightly his knuckles were bleeding where his nails dug into his palms. "Chloe, look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Is this real? Did you breed with Travis?" "I didn't. Jules, I swear on my life I didn't." Chloe sobbed hysterically, tears and running makeup turning her face into a grotesque mask. "Your mother bribed someone to make those papers. She wants Elena back. She's trying to frame me." "Frame you?" Beatrix screamed, snatching the remaining documents from the podium and throwing them directly at Julian's chest. "Read them yourself, you blind, arrogant fool. Read the DNA probability charts. Read the clinic's internal donor transfer logs. Look at the time-stamped photographs of your precious wife walking into the clinic arm with your cousin." Julian caught a handful of the falling sheets. His eyes darted frantically across the page. "Client: Chloe Vance. Procedure: frozen embryo transfer using donor K7 Travis Montgomery." Beneath it was a high-resolution surveillance printout, showing Chloe and Travis standing at the Prime Life reception desk. Travis signing a medical release form while Chloe handed the receptionist a corporate credit card. From the guest tables, the murmurs escalated into audible, ruthless mockery. Unbelievable. The guy divorced his successful corporate wife because she couldn't give him kids only to get cucked by his own cousin. The Montgomery family name is completely dead in this state. Old Judge Montgomery will never be able to show his face at the clubhouse again. He bragged about those twins for 6 solid months on LinkedIn. Turns out he's just paying for Travis's litter. Every single whisper, every muffled laugh, every look of pitying disgust struck Julian like a physical blow to the head. His entire body began to tremor violently. In his arms, the infant boy, who he had been holding so proudly just 10 minutes ago, was squeezed so tightly against his ribs that the baby let out a high-pitched, breathless shriek of pain. The stage was an absolute war zone of screaming babies, sobbing women, and paralyzed men. The grand baby debut celebration had officially transformed into the most catastrophic, publicly humiliating, grotesque farce in Southern high society history. Down in my hotel suite, my iPad screen captured every single glorious second of the carnage. My iPhone buzzed on the glass table, a fresh text from Aunt Martha. "The stage is primed. Honey, the whole house is burning down. Time to make your entrance." I stared at the screen, picked up my coffee cup and took one final calm sip. Then I set the mug down and stood up out my window. The southern sun was blazing directly overhead, casting harsh, unforgiving light over the Montgomery Estate Pavilion. Perfect timing. The best time to walk onto a stage is right when the actors have forgotten their lines. I closed my laptop, picked up a sleek black leather document portfolio containing my second set of parting gifts, grabbed my rental car keys and walked out of the suite. 10 minutes later, my black rental sedan pulled up to the outer perimeter of the Montgomery estate. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a pair of 5-in Christian Louis Vuitton heels, a tailored black Gabbani business suit, and oversized designer sunglasses. I pushed my way smoothly through the crowd of shocked, whispering guests gathered near the entrance of the pavilion. Someone in the back row spotted me first. A sharp gasp cut through the murmur. "Good God, is that Elena Consincade?" Within 5 seconds, the entire lawn went dead silent as hundreds of heads swiveled in my direction. The stares were a chaotic mixture of shock, embarrassment, morbid curiosity, and dawning comprehension. For the past 6 months, I had been the town's favorite punching bag, the cold, infertile ex-wife who had been rightfully discarded by the Montgomery clan so they could secure a fertile Southern bride. And now, at the exact moment, their magnificent dynasty was being publicly exposed as a fraudulent, incestuous joke, the discarded ex-wife was walking right through their front gates, looking like $1 million. Up on the stage, Julian froze. He turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto my figure as I parted the crowd. It looked as if he had been struck square in the chest by a sledgehammer. The maniacal rage in his eyes was instantly eclipsed by a massive tidal wave of profound dread and disbelief. He knew me better than anyone. He knew that Elena Kincaid never wasted her time on casual social visits. He knew that if I was walking onto this property today, I wasn't there to be a spectator. I was the executioner. I took my time walking up the center aisle, the sharp times click-clack of my Louis Bouttouten against the brick patio was steady, measured, and completely unhurried. Every step sounded like the ticking of a doomsday clock. I reached the front of the pavilion, mounted the carpeted steps, and stepped onto the stage. I ignored the screaming babies and the hyperventilating Chloe entirely. I offered Beatrix a brief, polite nod of acknowledgement times. "Good job, Beatrix times," and then turned my full undivided attention to Julian. He was standing there holding the crying infant boy, his skin the color of wet ash, his lips parted in dumbfounded terror. I removed my sunglasses, slipping them into my Givenchy jacket pocket, and offered him a warm, impeccably polite corporate smile. "Well, Jules," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the stage microphone that Beatrice had left active on the podium, "it looks like my timing is impeccable." With fluid precision, I unzipped my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal-sized financial documents bound in blue corporate backing. I placed them gently onto the center table right next to Chloe's scattered Prime Life IVF records. A light southern breeze ruffled the top pages, causing them to flutter with a sharp, crisp rustle. The entire 300-person guest list leaned forward in their chairs, holding their breath to see what the next drop would be. I didn't rush. I looked Julian dead in the eyes, my voice steady, professional, and loud enough to reach the back row of the tent. "You always love to brag to your high society friends that Next Gen Solutions was entirely your own corporate triumph and that my departure wouldn't affect your operations in the slightest," I said smoothly. "So, since you've gathered the entire county elite here today to celebrate your massive success, I decided to do you a professional favor. I came here today to conduct a real-time public audit of your financial books." Julian's jaw dropped. The knuckles of the hand gripping the baby turned bone white. "Elena, stop this. What are you doing? This is a private family matter. Get off this stage." "A private family matter," I interrupted him, my tone light and conversational as my gaze swept out over the sea of county judges, bank presidents, and prominent investors. "Jules, 5 minutes ago you were standing on this exact stage, microphone in hand, desperately trying to show off your wealth, your legacy, and your corporate superiority to everyone in this town. If you love a public audience so much, let's give them a comprehensive presentation." I reached down, picked up the second document from my stack, and stepped to the edge of the stage, handing it down to an elderly gentleman sitting at table 2. Mr. Henderson, the retired managing partner of the region's largest accounting firm and an old associate of Julian's father. "Mr. Henderson," I said respectfully, "you spent 40 years auditing municipal and corporate ledgers in this state. As an independent professional, would you mind reading the highlighted figures on that balance sheet out loud for the audience?" Mr. Henderson blinked in surprise. He looked at Julian, looked at the trembling Judge Montgomery, and then adjusted his reading glasses, focusing on the document in his hands. Within 3 seconds, his professional brow furrowed into a deep V. "This is good heavens," Mr. Henderson muttered into his microphone, which a curious tablemate held up to his face. "This is the consolidated operating cash flow statement for Next Gen Solutions for the past 90 days. Along with certified copies of commercial debt liens in layman's terms, Mr. Henderson," I projected my voice over the crowd. "Julian has systematically pledged and collateralized every single unencumbered asset within Next Gen Solutions. The corporate real estate, the intellectual property, the server hardware, the executive company vehicles, even the projected accounts receivable for the next 36 months have all been mortgaged to secondary predatory lenders at exorbitant interest rates." I paused. turning back to Julian, whose knees were actually beginning to tremble. And to maintain the illusion of solvency so he could secure those emergency bridge loans, he submitted a certified revenue projection based on a $5 million enterprise software contract with an overseas tech conglomerate. I raised my right hand, pointing a finger at a separate red flag document on the table. That $5 million contract is a complete manufactured forgery. The guest pavilion erupted into a massive wave of shocked gasps and angry shouting. A forgery? A local venture capitalist in row 3 shouted, jumping to his feet. He told us at the country club last month that contract was signed and sealed. I was preparing to participate in his Series B funding round next week. He lied on commercial loan applications. That's federal bank fraud. The entire company is a house of cards. Julian's eyes darted wildly around the stage, a look of absolute trapped panic taking over his face. He lunged toward the microphone, screaming over the crowd. She's lying. Don't listen to a word she says. She's a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to destroy my corporate reputation. That contract is legitimate. She has no internal access to my company anymore. Why would I need internal access, Jules? I laughed softly. A sound as cold and sharp as shattering ice. I am the senior financial risk auditor who built the structural foundation of your company from scratch. That overseas enterprise client you allegedly signed, the corporate entity you listed on the loan documents, was officially dissolved and liquidated by the Securities and Exchange Commission 6 months ago due to insolvency. The corporate tax ID number you typed onto your forged agreement is missing 2 digits, and the digital signature stamp you used, it belongs to an offshore shell firm that defaulted in 2021. I took a deep breath, looking down at his sweating pale face with absolute clinical contempt. Jules, did you genuinely believe that once I walked out of your penthouse, I simply stopped monitoring the financial ecosystem I spent 5 years building? I paced slowly across the stage, addressing the crowd like I was conducting a corporate boardroom presentation to cover his massive operational losses and maintain his lavish high society lifestyle. Julian took out fraudulent commercial loans to pay off old corporate debt, using non-existent future revenue to plug immediate liquidity holes. It was a textbook illegal Ponzi structure, designed to keep NextGen afloat just long enough for him to stage this celebration and con local investors into bailing him out. I lifted my left wrist, checking the time on my diamond-studded Cartier timepiece. However, I'm afraid that exit strategy is no longer viable. Exactly 30 minutes before I arrived at this estate, my legal teams transmitted the complete unedited forensic accounting audit, along with certified copies of the forged loan documents, to the Commercial Fraud Division of the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, and every primary lending institution holding debt on NextGen Solutions. I looked Julian dead in the eye. By my estimation, your corporate bank accounts, credit lines, and merchant processing facilities were officially frozen by federal order roughly 12 minutes ago. Your corporate empire isn't just bankrupt, Jules. It is under active federal seizure. Julian reeled backward as if he had been shot in the chest. You're insane, he whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. You ruined me. You destroyed my life. I ruined you. I took a step forward, my gaze glacial and uncompromising. Jules, NextGen Solutions didn't collapse today because I pushed it over. It collapsed because you hollowed it out from the inside like a greedy termite. I gestured aggressively toward Chloe, who was weeping uncontrollably on the floor of the stage. You drained hundreds of thousands of dollars in critical operational capital out of your startup to fund your secret affair. You bought luxury midtown condos, imported sports cars, Hermes handbags, first-class vacations to Maui, and private fertility clinic treatments. You utilized company marketing budgets to pay off your mistress's brother's gambling debts. Did I authorize those corporate expenditures? I spun around, my eyes locking on to Travis Montgomery, who was still cowering near the catering tent, trying desperately to edge toward the parking lot exit. And your precious cousin Travis. You paid him a 6-figure executive salary out of your engineering payroll, while he did nothing but gamble and act as your wife's private sperm donor. Should I read off the exact dollar amount of corporate funds you embezzled to cover Travis's legal settlements, Jules? Would you like me to read that to your father right now? Travis let out a pathetic whimper, his knees giving out completely as he slumped down into the grass behind the bar. At the VIP table, retired Judge Montgomery attempted to stand up to defend his family name, but the sheer emotional and financial shock of the revelations was too much. His eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed sideways out of his chair onto the brick patio. "Robert!" Beatrice screamed in horror, abandoning Chloe and rushing off the stage to throw herself over her unconscious husband as several guests shouted for someone to dial 911. Right at that exact second, the smartphone in Julian's Tom Ford jacket pocket began to vibrate with violent, frantic intensity. His hand was shaking so badly he dropped the infant boy onto a cushioned stage chair, pulling the phone out of his pocket. The screen flashed the caller ID. Jessica, executive assistant. Operating on sheer blind instinct, Julian swiped the screen to answer, inadvertently activating the speakerphone mode as his thumb slipped on the glass. Before he could utter a single syllable, Jessica's hysterical, panic-stricken voice exploded from the phone speaker, projecting clearly into the stage microphone and broadcasting across the entire estate. "Mr. Montgomery, thank God you answered. It's an absolute disaster." Jessica was screaming, her breath ragged as if she were running down a hallway. "Federal agents just raided the Chicago headquarters. We have FBI financial crime investigators and IRS special agents locking down the executive suites right now. They're seizing all the servers and corporate hard drives. They presented a federal warrant for commercial bank fraud and wire fraud." Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Jessica's hysterical screams continued to pour from the phone, and it gets worse. "The commercial banks just called our finance department. All our operating accounts are completely frozen, our payroll bounced, and 5 minutes ago, we received a formal cease and desist injunction from legal counsel representing Dr. Arthur Vance." Julian's eyes went wide with confusion. Dr. Vance." He managed to croak into the receiver. "Yes, doctor. Vance, Elena's former grad school advisor. He formally revoked our core proprietary licensing agreement as of 12,000 p.m. today. He stated that, because our firm violated the covenants of the initial intellectual property transfer by engaging in fraudulent accounting, the foundational algorithmic patents for all next-gen software have been legally terminated and reverted back to him. Our primary product line is officially dead. We have nothing left to sell." Jessica broke down into audible, hyperventilating sobs over the speakerphone. "The institutional investors are calling the office, threatening to file personal lawsuits against you. The engineering team is walking out the door. Mr. Montgomery, you have to get back to Chicago right now. If you don't come back, they're going to issue a federal warrant for your arrest. Next Gen is finished. We are completely dead." Click. The line went dead. Julian's hand went limp. The expensive iPhone slipped from his fingers, falling onto the wooden stage floor with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. The entire Montgomery estate was wrapped in a suffocating graveyard silence. 5 minutes ago, this lawn was the scene of the most extravagant celebratory baby debut in South Carolina history. Now, it looked like the aftermath of a military airlift strike. The only sounds left were the wailing cries of the infant twins sitting on the stage chairs, the distant wail of an approaching ambulance for Judge Montgomery, and the harsh, ragged breathing of 200 high society guests staring at Julian in absolute horrified revulsion. The man who had stood on that stage 10 minutes ago bragging about his brilliant corporate mind, his immaculate family lineage, and his status as the ultimate winner in life was completely destroyed. His company was seized by federal agents. His financial assets were frozen. His father was having a heart attack on the patio, and the twin heirs he had spent 6 months showing off to the world were the biological offspring of his deadbeat cousin. He had fallen from the absolute pinnacle of high society arrogance into the deepest, most humiliating pit of personal and professional destruction in the span of 15 minutes. On the floor of the stage, Chloe had completely lost her grip on reality. Her hair was falling out of its elegant chignon, hanging in greasy, sweat-soaked strands across her face as she scrambled on her knees toward Julian, grabbing at his trousers. "Jules! Jules, say something!" she screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them your assistant is lying. You're a CEO. You have millions of dollars. We have the babies. Jules, do something." I looked down at her pathetic scrambling form and let out a soft, dismissive sigh. I reached into my leather portfolio one last time and pulled out the final sheet of paper. It was a formalized, notarized certificate of equity transfer. I held the document up high, turning it so the bright southern sun illuminated the bold black legal text and the official corporate seals for the entire front row to see. "I almost forgot to mention one final administrative detail, Jules," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Chloe's hysterical wailing. "That 15% equity stake in Next-Gen Solutions that I agreed to take off your hands in our property settlement. I executed the final sale of those shares yesterday afternoon." Julian raised his head slowly, his eyes hollow and vacant as he stared at the document in my hand. "I didn't sell them for much," I continued, a cold, triumphant smile gracing my lips, a modest $15 million in liquid cash. But the primary buyer wasn't a friendly angel investor or a venture capital firm. It was Vanguard Corporate Restructuring, a predatory, hostile liquidation fund known for dismantling bankrupt tech assets. I paused, allowing the weight of my words to sink into his shattered brain. Their absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for closing the buyout was that, upon assumption of equity, they would immediately initiate aggressive corporate liquidation and dissolution proceedings against Next-Gen Solutions to recover their capital from your remaining hardware and office leases. I lowered the paper, staring directly into Julian's bloodshot, defeated eyes. "Which means as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, Next-Gen Solutions is no longer a Montgomery family enterprise. It belongs entirely to a Wall Street liquidation firm. You don't even own the chair at your desk anymore, Jules." Julian stood completely paralyzed. The remaining blood in his body seemed to pool into his feet, leaving him resembling a wax statue of a man. His lips parted, his jaw trembling violently as his brain finally assembled the entire timeline of my actions over the past 2 weeks. "You," he whispered, his voice so faint the microphone barely picked it up. "You planned all of this from the very beginning." "Yes," I admitted cleanly and proudly without a shred of modesty. "I started planning this exact sequence of events the very night I confirmed. You took Chloe to that hotel in Midtown. The moment you decided to betray my 5 years of loyalty, kick me out of my own company, and use my hard-earned corporate equity to fund your lavish new lifestyle with my best friend, your destruction was set in stone." I stepped closer to him, my voice dropping into a low, glacial tone that carried absolute uncompromising authority. "You thought you could step on my neck to build your dream life? You thought I was just some quiet accounting spreadsheet you could discard whenever you felt like upgrading. I told you before, Jules, I manage corporate risk for a living. When an asset becomes toxic, I don't just dump it, I neutralize it entirely." From the guest tables, the initial shock finally curdled into open, aggressive hostility. "You absolute piece of garbage," a retired state senator shouted from table 1, pointing his cane at Julian. "You lied to federal banks. You stole from your own startup. And you brought this disgusting, incestuous freak show into your father's house. Judge Montgomery spent 50 years building a spotless reputation on the bench, and you destroyed it in 10 minutes for a cheating gold digger. Call the sheriff. Don't let him leave the county. He's a federal fugitive. Get out of our town, you make us sick." The crowd was swarming around the pavilion now. Several country club board members were physically blocking the exits to prevent Julian or Travis from fleeing before local law enforcement arrived. Down on the patio, paramedics were rushing through the crowd with a stretcher, loading the unconscious Judge Montgomery onto a gurney, while Beatrice walked beside him, weeping hysterically, her royal blue suit stained with spilled coffee and tears. As she walked past the stage, Beatrice stopped for one brief second. She turned her head, looking up at Julian, her golden boy, her celebrated CEO heir, with an expression of such profound, devastating revulsion and disappointment that it looked like she was looking at a dead stranger. She didn't say a word. She simply turned her back on him and followed the paramedics toward the ambulance. Julian was left standing entirely alone on the center stage, surrounded by weeping women, screaming infants, and 300 screaming county elite calling for his arrest. There was nothing left for him to say. No eloquent corporate speech could explain away federal bank fraud warrants. No high-society spin could erase the Prime Life IVF donor records linking his wife to his cousin. He was entirely, irrevocably stripped of his wealth, his status, his family, and his dignity. I looked at his shaking, pathetic silhouette one last time. Suddenly, a wave of profound indifference washed over me. The debt was settled, the ledger was fully balanced. Spending another second on this stage felt like a waste of my valuable time. I placed the certificate of equity back into my Giveni leather portfolio, zipped it shut, and turned my back on him to walk down the stage steps. Elena. Julian's voice ripped from his throat a ragged, agonizing scream of pure desperation. I paused at the edge of the stage, but I didn't turn around. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of his Tom Ford dress shoes stumbling across the wood as he threw himself forward, collapsing onto his knees just a few feet behind me. His breathing was heavy, ragged, and wet, with sudden hysterical tears. "Did you?" he choked out, every word trembling with agonizing pain. "Did you ever even for 1 second actually love me?" I stood still for 2 seconds. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Not a corporate smirk, but a smile of absolute liberated clarity. I turned my head slightly, looking back over my shoulder, at the kneeling, broken man who used to be my husband. The handsome, ambitious young entrepreneur who had once held my hand in a cramped Queen's apartment and promised me the world was completely dead and buried. In his place was a pathetic criminal fraudster, kneeling in the ruins of his own arrogance. "Of course I loved you, Jules," I said softly, my voice calm and crystal clear. "I loved you enough to take my life savings and my youth and build you an empire from nothing when you didn't have a dime to your name." My smile faded, my eyes turning as hard and cold as cut diamonds. "But you took my loyalty and my heart, and you threw them into the gutter. So now you get to live in the gutter. This entire catastrophe isn't bad luck, Jules. It's just the final balance on your account." Without waiting for his reply, I turned my head back around, gripped my leather portfolio, and walked down the steps of the pavilion. My 5-in Louboutins clicked steadily against the brick patio as I parted the crowd of screaming, chaotic guests. Behind me, the stage was a symphony of absolute destruction. Chloe screaming hysterically as county sheriffs walked onto the lawn, Travis being dragged out from behind the bar by private security, Julian sobbing uncontrollably on his knees, and the high-pitched wailing of 2 infants who belonged to none of them. I didn't look back once, not a single glance. Because as of 11:30 a.m., on this brilliant southern Sunday morning, absolutely none of it was my business anymore. By the time I reached the outer brick gates of the Montgomery estate, the morning heat was rising, but the breeze blowing off the tidal river felt exceptionally fresh and clean. The weeping willows lining the street swayed gently in the wind, entirely indifferent to the high society apocalypse unfolding 3 blocks away. Just as I reached my black rental sedan, I heard familiar footsteps hurrying down the sidewalk behind me. "Elena, honey, wait up." I turned around to see Aunt Martha jogging toward me, breathless. Her Sunday church hat slightly askew on her head. Her face was flushed red from the excitement, her eyes shining with tears of fierce pride and vindication. In her hands she clutched a large stainless steel thermos. "Aunt Martha," I smiled, stepping forward to catch her hands. "Oh, my brave, beautiful girl," Martha panted, pulling me into a fierce, crushing southern hug that smelled of lavender and vanilla. She held me tight for several long seconds before pulling back, wiping a tear from her wrinkled cheek. "You went through all that hell, all that betrayal and heartbreak. And you never breathed a word of it to your old auntie until this week. Why did you carry all that weight by yourself, honey?" I smiled gently, tapping the leather portfolio under my arm. "Because in my line of work, Aunt Martha, you never make an accusation until the audit is complete and the checkmate is on the board." Martha let out a hearty, booming laugh, slapping her knee. "Well, you certainly audited their tails today, sweetheart. I have never seen anything like it in 30 years at the courthouse." Old Beatrice looked like she swallowed a bucket of nails, and Julian, Lord, that boy is going to be wearing a federal jumpsuit before the month is out. She thrusts the heavy thermos into my hands. "Here, I made this fresh this morning before the madness started. It's my special southern sweet tea with peach nectar and crushed mint. You take this with you on your drive back to the airport. It'll keep you cool." I unscrewed the lid of the thermos. The sweet, icy fragrance of fresh Georgia peaches and mint drifted up, instantly clearing the last lingering traces of estate toxicity from my lungs. I took a long, refreshing sip. It was the best thing I had tasted in 5 years. "It's never too late, honey," Aunt Martha said softly, reaching out to gently smooth a stray lock of hair away from my forehead. Her eyes were warm and intensely maternal. "You're young, you're brilliant, and you've got the whole world sitting in the palm of your hand. You go back up to that city, and you live your life for times now. Don't you ever look back at this swamp again." I nodded firmly, my smile reaching all the way to my eyes. "I won't, Aunt Martha, I promise. No more looking back." That afternoon, I drove my rental car back up the coastal highway toward the Charleston International Airport. Above me, the southern sky was transformed into a breathtaking canvas of deep orange, violet, and gold, looking like a massive blaze, burning away old corporate ledgers and turning my past into harmless ash. What awaited Julian Montgomery back in town was just the tip of the iceberg. By Monday morning, the financial and legal news cycles exploded across the country. Wall Street Journal exclusive. Next Gen Solutions seized in federal bank fraud raid. Founder Julian Montgomery ousted as CEO. Chicago Tribune. Tech star falls from grace. FBI investigating multi-million-dollar commercial loan forgeries at Next Gen. Local Dispatch. Historic Savannah family in shock as high society baby debuted ends in brawl and paternity scandal. The internet feeds were moving at blinding speed. Financial journalists and legal commentators swarmed over the carcass of Next Gen Solutions, like sharks sensing blood in the water. The Montgomery family, who had spent decades obsessing over their spotless aristocratic reputation, was completely paralyzed. Beatrice and the recovering Judge Montgomery had barricaded themselves inside the Savannah estate, refusing to answer calls from reporters or old friends, unable to show their faces in the state of South Carolina. As for Chloe, her true survivalist nature surfaced with breathtaking speed. 3 days after the estate explosion, I received a secure digital communication from the private investigator I had retained in Chicago. It contained a single surveillance photograph and a brief banking summary. In the photo taken at 2:00 a.m., in the underground parking garage of the Midtown luxury condo Julian had bought her, Chloe was dressed entirely in black athletic wear, her face obscured by a baseball cap and a heavy respirator mask. She was frantically shoving 3 massive overstead Louis Vuitton luggage bags into the trunk of a battered sedan. She wasn't alone. Standing right beside her, nervously scanning the garage entrance, was Travis Montgomery. Their operational pivot had been ruthless and immediate. The investigator's summary noted the specifics. Asset tracking update. Over the past 48 hours, Chloe Vance utilized joint banking credentials and power of attorney documents to systematically liquidate $450,000 from Julian Montgomery's personal emergency savings accounts and money market funds. She cleared out the contents of his private safe deposit box at Chase Bank, removing an estimated $200,000 in jewelry, gold coins, and bearer bonds. All funds were successfully routed through offshore crypto exchanges and deposited into an untraceable account registered in the Cayman Islands under Travis Montgomery's SLC. Subjects vacated the Midtown premises at 0:24 a.m. and are currently driving west toward the Arizona border. I stared at the surveillance photo on my laptop screen, closed the lid, and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Perfect. When wild dogs are starved of their meat, they inevitably turn around and tear each other to shreds. Now, that is a truly satisfying return on investment. 2 days later, Julian finally called my personal cell phone. It didn't come from his corporate iPhone, nor was it from his executive assistant's line. He had managed to borrow a prepaid burner phone from someone likely a bail bondsman or a cheap motel clerk. When I slid my thumb across the screen to answer, the line was dead silent for several seconds. There was no background music, no corporate confidence, only the heavy, ragged sound of a man hyperventilating into the receiver. After roughly 15 seconds, his voice finally came through. It was so raspy, weak, and hollowed out that he sounded like an 80-year-old man. Elena. I didn't offer a greeting, I simply made a neutral acknowledging sound in the back of my throat. Chloe ran away. Those 3 words tumbled out of his mouth with a pathetic, absurd comedy that was almost painful to listen to. He had finally been forced to confront the objective mathematical truth. The pure, traditional, loving woman he had placed on a pedestal and sacrificed his marriage to attain was at her core a ruthless financial predator who had used him as a transitional liquidity bridge. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Chicago penthouse, swirling a glass of expensive Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon as I looked out over the glittering city skyline. My voice was completely level, conveying the detachment of an actuary reading a weather report. I know, and I assume she took every liquid asset that wasn't bolted to the floor. Julian's breath hitched into a violent, shuddering sob over the line. She took everything, Elena. She drained my personal checking accounts. She emptied my money market funds. She took my grandmother's diamond rings out of the safe deposit box. Even the college trust fund capital I had set aside for the babies. She stripped it all out and fled to Arizona with Travis. Travis's phone is disconnected. My father won't even speak to me. He changed the security codes on the Savannah estate gate. My own mother told the gate guards to call the police if I step onto the property. He fell silent for a long, agonizing minute. I could hear him weeping uncontrollably into the cheap plastic burner phone. The sound of his absolute, unmitigated ruin echoing across the digital frequency. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper, thick with devastating, belated realization. You knew, didn't you? You knew she was going to rob me. You knew those babies weren't mine from the very start. Yes, Jules. I knew, I replied calmly, taking a slow sip of my wine. I had the complete forensic dossier in my possession before I even handed you the divorce papers. Why didn't you tell me? He screamed suddenly. A brief hysterical flash of his old arrogance surfacing before collapsing back into despair. If you knew she was a con artist breeding with Travis, why didn't you warn me? Why did you let me walk onto that stage and destroy my entire life? Why was it my fiduciary responsibility to warn you, Jules? I countered, my voice dropping an octave into an icy razor-sharp register. That was your own strategic corporate decision. You made the active choice to betray our marriage, kick me out of the company I saved, and install your mistress in my place. You constantly lectured me that Chloe was sweet, innocent, and the only woman capable of giving you a loving home. Well, if she just looted your bank accounts and fled across state lines with your cousin, doesn't that simply mean your executive judgment was fundamentally flawed? Elena, please, Julian cried out, his voice cracking with utter abject desperation. Don't talk to me like an auditor. What am I supposed to do now? I have federal bank fraud charges pending. Vanguard is liquidating my office furniture. I'm living in a 2-star motel near the airport with $50 in my pocket. Please show some mercy. What kind of mercy are you looking for, Jules? I asked coldly. Would you like me to draft a memo expressing my corporate sympathy? Or would you prefer I send you a congratulatory card on your well-deserved bankruptcy? He choked on his tears, unable to form a coherent argument. After a prolonged silence, his voice dropped into the pathetic, begging tone of a drowning man reaching for a razor blade. I regret it, Elena. God, I regret everything so much, he wept. My company is gone. The children aren't mine. The woman I sacrificed my reputation for was a criminal who conned me from day one. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. Elena, please let me come back to you. Let's start over. If you take me back, I'll sign over whatever future earnings I ever make. I'll do whatever you want. I'll be the supportive partner you always wanted. Please, Elena, I'm begging you. I closed my eyes for a second, taking another sip of my Cabernet. Listening to his pathetic pleas, I felt an overwhelming sense of sheer boredom. It was so remarkably predictable. This is the fundamental architecture of an entitled narcissistic man. When his corporate valuations are soaring and his life is smooth, he treats your loyalty like a stepping stone to be trampled on. But the exact second his fraudulent empire collapses and he falls into the dirt, he desperately tries to turn you into his personal life raft. He didn't regret betraying me. He didn't regret breaking his marriage vows or lying to my face for a year. He only regretted losing the one hyper-competent, loyal woman who had always been willing to clean up his financial messes and keep him solvent. I waited patiently in silence until his sobbing subsided into ragged gasps for air. Then I leaned closer to the receiver, my voice crystal clear, completely devoid of anger, pity, or hesitation. Julian, I said smoothly, you have made a critical error in your risk assessment model. I am not your contingency plan. I am not your bridge loan, and I will never be your life raft again. His breath caught sharply in his throat. Elena, please do not ever attempt to contact this number or my corporate office again. I cut him off, my tone carrying final, absolute legal authority. Whatever federal indictments, financial judgments, or personal miseries come your way over the next 10 years are the direct quantifiable return on the investments you made. They belong entirely to you. Our partnership is permanently terminated. Without waiting for a single word of response, I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the end call button, and immediately registered the prepaid burner number into my permanent firewall block list. Outside my penthouse windows, the deep blue dusk of Chicago had fully settled, and the city lights were burning with intense electric brilliance across the loop. I poured myself another ounce of the rich red Cabernet, settling comfortably into the plush leather of my sofa. My iPhone screen lit up silently on the glass coffee table. It was an audio message from Aunt Martha down in Savannah. I tapped play. Aunt Martha's voice filled the room, brimming with cheerful Southern vindication. Well, honey, just wanted to give you the final local update. Julian actually took a Greyhound bus back down to Savannah this afternoon and tried to get into the estate to beg his daddy for bail money. He was down on his knees on the brick driveway, crying his eyes out, but old Judge Montgomery ordered the groundskeepers to keep the iron gates padlocked shut. Didn't even send out a glass of water for him. Beatrice stood on the second-floor balcony and screamed down that she has no son anymore. Now the whole town is shunning him like he's got the plague. He walked back down the highway with his head hanging between his knees. Absolute justice, darling. I listened to the message to the very end, smiled, and tapped delete. Then I opened my professional leather-bound master schedule. Next Monday morning at 9:00 a.m., I was scheduled to lead a high-stakes valuation meeting with the managing partners of a premier Silicon Valley venture capital fund evaluating a $40 million lead investment in a revolutionary AI cybersecurity infrastructure firm. Next month, I was flying out to Zurich to keynote an international merger and acquisition summit for women in executive leadership. My professional and personal horizon was wide open, stretching out before me with endless brilliant possibilities. I had decades of youth, massive capital resources, and complete personal autonomy to construct a life more magnificent, independent, and fulfilling than anything I had ever experienced in my past. As for Julian Montgomery, he wasn't even a notable corporate failure in my professional portfolio anymore. He was simply an expired, fully amortized bad debt write-off from a fiscal year that had already been closed, audited, and archived. I raised my crystal glass of Cabernet toward the glittering Chicago skyline, watching the deep ruby liquid catch the ambient light of the city. It looked like a silent, well-deserved toast to liberation. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I was finally living exclusively, unapologetically, and gloriously for